Good evening. Welcome. It's great to see all of you here. Welcome to one of the first big events of the spring semester, and really one of my favorite annual events here at the law school. This is the 21st annual Attorney General Robert Abrams Public Service Lecture, and I'm Trevor Morrison. I'm the Dean of the law school. This Abrams Lecture really is a hallmark event at the law school every year. It's something we look forward to hosting. It's part of an effort by the law school to foster commitment to public service by featuring leading public servants who are forging important careers in the interest of the public and serving the public, and who themselves can provide role models for our students contemplating careers of their own in public service. And without putting too fine a point on it, let me just say, now more than ever, we need role models of that sort in public service. And so we are thrilled tonight in particular to our friend and graduate from the NYU Law class of 1963, the Honorable Robert Abrams, for making this possible. Bob, thank you very much indeed. I also want to thank personally the District of Columbia Attorney General Karl Racine, today's speaker, for joining us. Bob will introduce General Racine in a moment. But first, let me just say a few words about public interest and public service here at the law school, and about Bob Abrams. I think it is beyond question that NYU Law offers a more comprehensive and has made a more comprehensive commitment to public service than really any other law school in the country. And it's something tremendously important to me. It's one of the reasons that I was thrilled to be offered the opportunity to come and work here at the law school, coming up on 5 years ago. And it's an ongoing institutional and for many of us personal commitment here. And the leaders of that effort are the folks in the Public Interest Law Center. And Lisa Hoyes and Gail Zweig are here. There's Lisa, and where's Gail? There she is. Thanks to both of you for what you do for public interest at the law school. The students in the room know that PILC provides really comprehensive support for those planning careers in public interest and public service, whether that means in government service or in the non-governmental space, through summer grants for students, through career advice to students thinking about work in this space, through providing access to our many, many alums in public interest and public service to help plot their careers, and through organizing events like this where we can bring leaders in public service to the law school to share their wisdom and their expertise. Speaking of wisdom and expertise, our graduate, the Honorable Robert Abrams, is a shining example of those things and of true dedication to public service. A few words about him. Bob has had a storied career in public service, including being a member of the New York State Assembly and serving 3 terms as Bronx Borough President, and then in 1978, elected to serve the first of 4 terms as New York's Attorney General, a position he ultimately held for 15 years. Bob is, by consensus, really a model of state attorney general, and I can't tell you how many state attorneys general I've met over the last several years who, without my prompting, without often their even knowing that I'm the dean of the law school from which Bob graduated, they will point to Bob Abrams as a model of what they hope to do in their time as attorney general of their state. And all of that reputation is well earned. Bob established himself as a leader on key issues like consumer protection, environment, finance, the integrity of not-for-profit organizations, civil rights, and real estate. And perhaps more important than the substantive achievements in all of those, he really provided a model of integrity in public service, of how to undertake hard work and to deal with difficult, often pointed conflicts in a way that just exuded integrity, good faith, and a willingness to work through difficult issues, crossing otherwise unbridgeable divides with other colleagues in government and outside. And again, I think there's never been a time more than today when we need those sorts of models. And so we are tremendously proud of our graduate, Bob Abrams, and tremendously thankful for his ongoing support of this lecture series. And without further ado, let me ask you to join me in welcoming Bob Abrams.
Thank you so much, Dean. I'm very grateful for those very, very warm, exceedingly warm and generous remarks. I want to thank the Dean and Lisa Hoyes and Lisa Borge for all their work to help to bring us together again on this special occasion tonight. Over 20 years ago, I was talking to a former Dean, John Sexton, and I said, John, I spent 28 years of my life in public office, and they were the most exciting and best years ever. 2 years out of graduating out of this law school, I by chance and serendipity, I ran for public office. And then almost 3 decades went by working in public service. But I'm concerned, I said, John, because when I pick up the newspapers, I invariably see negative stories about those in public office who betray the public trust. And those are the isolated few and not the normal many who I met in the course of public service, who I felt were outstanding people. They were capable, they were honest, they were hardworking. And I'm concerned that students, who we desperately need, young people with energy, enthusiasm, integrity, ability, knowledge, drive, determination, we need them to help purify the ills and the evils that perpetuate in our society. We need them not to drop out, but to roll up their sleeves and get involved. And they can't be discouraged. They have to have a potential burning ambition to say, I want to run for public office. I want to serve as the chief of staff of an elected official. I want to do something to help remediate the evils and the ills in the world and repair the world. And we've got to do something to try to encourage them to do that. So we came up with this idea that if students here at the law school, once a year, came in contact with one of these exemplary public officials, perhaps they'd walk away from the lecture and say, oh, that Heidi Heitkamp, United States Senator from North Dakota, what a genuine woman she was. And I just was bowled over, and I never expected to hear the kind of sincerity that came from her. Or Jim Doyle, the former Attorney General of Wisconsin who became the governor. Or Joe Lieberman, who launched the series over 21 years ago. So the dozens of people who have come as former judges, attorneys general, governors, United States senators, to try to come to this law school and imbue some confidence and encouragement to law students. And thankfully that has happened over these 2 decades. And tonight, we have another incredible example of the kind of person I'm talking about. Somebody who I got to know a few years ago and have grown to admire based upon what he has done, who he is, and what he's all about. The Attorney General of the District of Columbia, Karl Racine. His parents came to this country as immigrants from some place called Haiti. It's been in the news lately. And as a 3.5-year-old, Karl came to the United States, and he and his family settled in the District of Columbia area. He grew up there, went to the local schools, wound up going to the University of Pennsylvania. He was the captain of the basketball team, a starter, a double-digit average in the last couple of years, all Ivy. And then he went to the University of Virginia Law School. Great law school, learned the law, and also was able to do something that was important to him. There was a clinic dealing with farm worker issues and problems, and he was passionate about that. He wanted to make sure there were no injustices done to migrant farm workers, and he participated in that. And after graduation from law school, over a couple of decades, he practiced law. And he did 2 things. He practiced in the public sector. He was a public defender, He was an associate counsel in the White House during the tenure of President Bill Clinton, and he worked in the private sector. One of the law firms he joined right out of college was the Venable Law Firm, and he rose from a first-year associate to the very top. He was selected to be the managing partner of Venable, the first African-American in the history of this country to be the managing partner of an Am Law 100 law firm. And then came the opportunity for him to seek elective office. And it was a unique moment in the history of the District of Columbia. The office there was called, the chief legal officer was called the Corporation Counsel, as is the case in the city of New York and other municipalities, but the law was changed to rename the office the Attorney General of the District of Columbia, and no longer was that person going to be appointed by the mayor. That person was going to be elected by the people of the District of Columbia. And Karl Racine ran and won the opportunity to be the first duly elected district attorney of the District of Columbia. And as such, he has done a fantastic job. His leadership qualities were immediately seen on the national horizon as he became a member of the National Association of Attorneys General, became an officer of the Democratic Attorney Generals Association, as he shaped that office to help the people of the District of Columbia in dealing with consumer protection and juvenile justice and housing issues, affordability of housing issues. And so it is a source of great pride and privilege for me to introduce the son of immigrants, an immigrant himself, who did the classic American thing, make this country a better place, and being the kind of person we all admire. It's my privilege and pleasure to introduce the Attorney General of the District of Columbia, Karl Racine.
So I've got a binder right at the seat of, right on the floor there. Those are my prepared remarks. I'm going to jettison those prepared remarks and just go with a little index card to guide me. And let me first say thank you so very much to NYU, Dean Morrison, the staff, Lisa, and Gail, for your warm embrace. Also want to thank everyone associated with NYU for granting my motion for continuance. I was invited to speak in September, third week of September, and sure enough, I guess the weekend before I was to speak, my mother suffered a pretty significant stroke, and I needed to really tend to her. And I'm so happy that, but not surprised, that I was certainly filled with love when I shared my personal crisis, but I was given the opportunity to still come and meet the fabulous students at NYU Law. So I come to you as a friend, as someone who loves the law and respects the mighty NYU Law School. Let me say a word about Bob Abrams first. You should know that the Office of Attorney General is run by Democrats and Republicans throughout the country. Collegiality is incredibly important to the well-being of the National Association of Attorney General. And while we are sometimes hopelessly partisan, Democrats on certain issues, Republicans on certain issues, it's incredibly important that overwhelmingly the nation's attorney generals are willing to work together on extraordinarily important issues, be it tobacco or today, the opioid crisis. And it's really because of people like Bob, who certainly is a passionate Democrat, but he leaves his political party at the door when it comes to having an opportunity to not only get to know and hear and understand a different perspective or viewpoint, but even more, have an opportunity to work together on a problem that we all confront, And so in a real way, I've modeled myself after Bob Abrams and the way he treats his colleagues and everybody he encounters. Because it's really that way, notwithstanding disagreement, and disagreement is necessary, that we're able to come together at times to tackle issues that only two parties can tackle. And so it's an honor for me to be here. I must add that I just learned that Bob's wife, Diane, is a Columbia Law grad. And according to Diane, Bob didn't get into Columbia. But we're all here at NYU now, and we're proud and lovely. I want to say that one of the greatest experiences I've had as being AG of the District of Columbia are the experiences you have to travel with fellow Attorney General to different places throughout the country and indeed internationally. And no trip that I've ever taken in my life has been more impactful to me than the trip that I took with Bob and about 6 or 7 other AGs to Israel with the American Israeli Friends of Israel. That trip opened my mind on a geopolitical level, and I can't tell you how much I've learned about the Middle East, rivalry, relevance, religion, property, but also how we must always engage in the work for peace. So if I were to leave my job today as Attorney General and somebody were to ask me what the highlights of the job were, I would have to include amongst the top 5 the journey that we took with your family, and Diane was certainly there, and having a Shabbat dinner with your family in Jerusalem was truly extraordinary. So it is an honor to be here. Now look, I'm going to be the first to tell you that I get a little nervous from time to time when I'm speaking in front of talented people, especially when prior Bob Abrams lectures are on YouTube on the internet. So I've seen so many of my former colleagues and friends appear here and give riveting talks. And I think their talks have been different, each one, of course, but they've all tried to share personal experiences with the students in particular, and try to imbue the students with the sense of idealism about what can be accomplished when folks decide to run for office or otherwise serve in the public service. And so I hope my remarks will continue that tradition. I will try to sprinkle a tip, maybe some guidance or something of that sort along the way, some things that I've learned and benefited from. So let me start off by saying, as Bob indicated, I am the child of Marie and Edzer Racine, who are Haitians, proud Haitians. And I've always known that I'm an immigrant, but I've also always known that eventually my father's dream would be realized, and that is that his 2 kids would become naturalized citizens of the United States and would become full participants in the democracy that is the United States. And my father passed a couple of decades ago. I should tell you that he was the mayor of his town, a town called Coatebouquet, which is now famous because it has another son, Wycliffe. But my dad always wanted me and my sister to consider elective office. And it's one regret that I have that I didn't run while he was living. Being an immigrant obviously has shaped a lot of my viewpoints on life and opportunity and law. And of course, Bob mentioned that Haiti was in the news recently as a result of reported comments that the President of the United States made about our beloved home country and other countries. I was very fortunate to be asked to comment on the president's remarks. And, and I shared my views. And I don't think that we should use words like racist or racism lightly. But I must tell you that I felt as though the president's reported remarks, were certainly of a racist mindset at worst, and at best, just the mindset of somebody who's gravely ignorant. And so I invited the president or his people at that point to meet with Haitian Americans and get to know Haitian Americans and get to know the unique history that Haiti and America, has shared over the last couple 125 years or so. I'm still waiting for the White House to take us up on our invitation, but I'm sure there will be an occasion at some point for greater sharing of the history of Haitians and the history of Americans. What I want to tell you is that Haiti sent Haitian soldiers to fight side by side with the colonists who sought to be free from Great Britain. And so the history of Haiti and America is a rich history and worthy of further exploration, perhaps by even you. Let me talk a little bit about why I went to law school and some of the important lessons that I've learned that have brought me to this place. I attended law school because, frankly, I was enthralled with the civil rights history of our great country. Does anybody know or heard of a man named Charles Hamilton Houston? There you go. Charles Hamilton Houston was a Washingtonian, an extraordinary human being. His father was a lawyer, in fact, and his mother was a seamstress. They grew up in lower to middle class Washington, D.C. Charles Hamilton Houston was a brilliant student, #1 in his high school class. Got a scholarship to Amherst College, valedictorian at Amherst, volunteered to join the forces in World War I and served as an artilleryman in France. What he experienced in France caused him to be focused on law. What he experienced was discrimination. Discrimination against African American soldiers who were fighting side by side with other Americans. And Charles Hamilton Houston determined that there is no way that when he comes back, he's going to stand for discrimination in a country that he fought for. And so when Charles Hamilton Houston returned from World War I, what did he do? He applied for law school, got into Harvard Law School, became the first African American who was elected to the Harvard Law Review Board. Then he returned home after graduating from law school. And after getting home, he was hired to be the dean of the Howard University Law School. And he determined that he would turn Howard University Law School into an armed forces of sort, legal sort, that would help dismantle Jim Crow in the South and bring about equality throughout the United States. And that's exactly what he did. He tutored and raised up a slew of lawyers, including Thurgood Marshall and plenty others. And unfortunately, Charles Hamilton Houston, died fairly early in life, or else we would be hearing about him more in the history books. Charles Hamilton Houston talked about lawyers in the law at that time period. And Charles Hamilton Houston was clear. He said that a lawyer is either a social engineer who would seek to use the law, the great tools of the law, to help vulnerable people, or would seek to use the law to enrich him or herself. In that case, Charles Hamilton Houston gave the students at Howard University two choices. You can be a social engineer or a parasite. I think he was a little harsh on the second side, but we get where he was coming from on the whole idea of using the law, right, as a tool to elevate the life and prospects of other people. Charles Hamilton Houston's life story has always stayed with me and resonated with me deeply, and indeed, it's the reason why I went to law school, to use the law, quite simply, to help people. And Bob mentioned at the University of Virginia School of Law, I was part of a migrant farm workers clinic in Charlottesville, Virginia, which is beautiful. There are apple orchards and peach orchards and things like that around. And they often had migrant farm workers come in to, really pick the fruit at peak harvest. What we found at UVA Law was that, unfortunately, some of the farms, were not abiding by law. What does that mean? It means they weren't paying folks the bare minimum of what the law required. It meant that they were not providing housing in the way that the law required. And it meant that they were not providing access, at this point, telephone access, to their workers so that the workers could keep in touch with their families. So the migrant farm workers went out and interviewed the farmers and prepared a legal complaint. And then lo and behold, every single farm started comporting themselves with law. And so it was a wonderful education of a first-year law student that even though we were not yet barred, we could have an incredible impact on the lives of vulnerable people. I think that's exactly why I decided to work at a law firm, the Venable Law Firm, after law school, that had a rich tradition of pro bono work. The firm was led by a former Attorney General of the United States, a guy named Ben Civiletti. Mr. Civiletti was a man of great intellect and also tremendous goodwill. I had the fortune of working with Ben Civiletti, and one of the first cases he put me on was a pro bono matter for a gentleman who was facing execution in the Commonwealth of Virginia. I didn't ask for the case. The case literally was assigned to me. For 4 years, I represented a gentleman named Timothy Bunch. And Timothy acknowledged killing another individual. What we were seeking in Timothy's case was the suppression of a statement that he had given to law enforcement, incriminating himself. As it turned out, we thought we were right on the law, but we lost in the federal habeas at the district court level and then at the Fourth Circuit on a 2-to-1 basis. And then we sought a rehearing en banc petition, and we lost just by 1 vote. And the way it went down was all the Democrats on the Fourth Circuit voted in favor of suppression. All of the Republicans, if you will, the conservatives, voted against it. And so my client was eventually executed. That was an extraordinary experience in law. I remember having conversations with Tim Bunch about my legal career. And I remember Tim arguing vociferously that I should become a prosecutor. And I asked Tim, why would you want me to become a prosecutor? Don't you know, Tim, that the way it is out here in the world is that indigent defendants don't really have the benefit in most jurisdictions of able counsel. That's where I need to play. Tim Bunch told me that I had it wrong, that even though there was a crisis and certainly there needed to be improvements for indigent defendants, prosecution was where it was at because that's where I could have an impact on scale, not just an individual case. I listened to Tim and disagreed with Tim and eventually became a public defender in the District of Columbia. Of course, that experience also, I was able to see exactly how poor people oftentimes were treated in the legal system. We were fortunate at the Public Defender Service in the District of Columbia to have exceptional lawyers and adequate resources. And so I learned a lot about fairness, equity, and again, the plight of poor people. Eventually, when I would decide to run for office and become a prosecutor, I realized the wisdom of Tim's counseling. Because one of my priorities as Attorney General was to really examine the juvenile justice system in the District of Columbia, offer suggested changes, and to make impact. So here's what we did in the District of Columbia on juvenile justice. We first studied exactly what the role of the Office of Attorney General was, and that wasn't too hard to come up with. Our job was to prosecute offenders, and then we would let the court decide the sentencing, and then we would let the DC agency in charge of taking custody of young people decide on the treatment for the convicted youthful offenders. Our team came back and determined that there was something wrong with the criminal justice process as regards juveniles, namely that the outcomes were problematic. Here's what we found. We found that young people who were successfully convicted were either placed on probation or committed to the Department of Youth and Rehabilitation Services. Digging deeper, we found that the rate of recidivism for young people who were placed on probation was about 55%. That meant that a kid who gets convicted, then placed on probation, would only be more likely to commit more crime and more violent crime. We then looked at kids who were incarcerated or committed to the DYRS, Department of Youth Rehabilitation Services. We also found that the outcomes were awful. That again, a high rate of recidivism, well over 50%. And so we dared to create a third door, a third way. We created a diversion program working with an office in the DC government called the Department of Human Services. We created this diversion program on the basis of evidence-based psychological assessments of young people. Assessments that would seek to understand in a deep way what is going on in their lives, at home, at school, in an extracurricular way. And then figure out after the assessment what type of services these kids could benefit from so that they would not recidivate. I'm happy to report to you that after 2.5 years of this diversion program, it's called the ACE diversion program, Alternatives to the Criminal Experience, we have diverted over 1,350 young people. 82% of those juveniles have not been rearrested. In short, we have completely changed the outcome of a very large percentage of the kids who enter the juvenile justice system. You students out there, you have passions, you have ideas, you see problems. If you decide to spend some time in the public service, perhaps even run for office, you might identify a problem not unlike the one that we identified in the juvenile justice realm. And you might identify a solution that enhances public safety, right? Reduces recidivism, that enhances public safety, and a solution that actually helps build resilience in young people who overwhelmingly come to the system as a result of their suffering from trauma. Trauma from growing up in neighborhoods that are beset with violence. Many of these kids themselves have been victimized. And it's really through creative solutions that we can have an impact. So I really want to emphasize that one reason to consider public service, one reason to consider elective office is the real possibility that through your work in public service, you can actually identify a problem and bring a solution that will not only enhance public safety, but will give young people, tremendous opportunity. Let me focus on a second issue that we had in the District of Columbia that I know is a problem elsewhere. We talked a little bit about this earlier in the dean's office with a couple of the students who were there. DC has an affordable housing crisis. And what that means for poor people is that invariably they are priced out of the District of Columbia. What it also means, unfortunately, is that unscrupulous developers and landlords oftentimes seek to take advantage of poor people by essentially running a business, a pattern and practice of being a slumlord. Well, we in our office have been able to focus in on the problem, and we've brought several slumlords to court. And we have stopped their practice of profiting from constructively evicting poor people only to start renovating the buildings after the poor people have left so that one can charge new people higher rates. Again, a real problem that was occurring in the District of Columbia that is occurring far less frequently now. Why? Because we use the law, just as Charles Hamilton Houston suggested, right, as a tool to help members of our most vulnerable community. These are the types of activities that progressive attorney generals, progressive lawyers take. Let me spend a minute of time talking about another part of my career. I was, as Bob nicely noted, the managing partner of the Venable Law Firm. And here the lesson really is that leadership matters. I was the managing partner of the firm. I was named the managing partner in mid-2006. The recession came into full swing 2008, 2009. In that time period, it was not a good time to be in the practice of law, certainly not in the private sector. It was not a good time to be in law school, as it was incredibly difficult to find a job during that time period. I remember having to go through the difficult process of determining whether or not our law firm would have a layoff. And we determined that we had to right size. And so what we did was I asked the 4 division managers, we had litigation, commercial, tax, and intellectual property division, to identify no more than 20 associates who would be the ones who we would lay off. I got to tell you, when that first list came back to us, I looked at the 20 names. 18 of those names were women. 7 were people of color. And I asked my personnel head, one of my good friends, Linda Jackson, what's wrong with this list? And she pointedly told me, and I'll never forget this. She said, Carl, you shouldn't be surprised by the list. The list comes from the managers who you've allowed to remain as managers. They're all boys. And they don't mean any express harm per se to women or the people of color who are lawyers in our office, but there's just a natural bias that they're exhibiting. And I said, okay, you're right. What do you think we should do? She said, send that list back. So about 4 lists later, we got it down to 15. There were no women on the list. And there was 1 person of color on that list. And I mention this to you because it was a lesson that Linda taught me, which is leadership matters. And it matters that you take care of who you also empower at your firm or in your office. And so I say to the students who are no doubt aspiring leaders, once you have the opportunity to lead, seize it. And always understand that you can actually impact fairness and equality and equity. It's a great lesson. Let me give you just a couple of other random tips I've learned from my time in the law. The White House job. How did I get that job? I was a public defender. Now, some would say President Clinton needed a public defender. There was a lot of investigations going on. That certainly was true. But the person who hired me at that job, there are actually 2 people at the White House who hired me. The White House counsel was a gentleman named Chuck Ruff. He was an extraordinary lawyer, a legend in the law in the District of Columbia. Chuck was a Harvard lawyer, been U.S. attorney in the District of Columbia, had actually been the corporation counsel, served as AG of the District of Columbia, and he was White House counsel. I met Chuck through pro bono work. And it was through working with Chuck on a pro bono case that we developed a professional relationship. And so he became familiar with my work and me, and he felt, as though I could help the team. What's the lesson there? The lesson there is doing good things always provides opportunities, not only to help sometimes the person who is your client, but also for you to impress people around you. The second person at the White House who hired me was a woman named Cheryl Mills. She was the deputy White House counsel at the time. And I had met Cheryl years before, mentoring young people in the District of Columbia. Again, the lesson, by doing good things, you're going to bump into really good people. But I think what Chuck and Cheryl would say to all you young lawyers is this: you make your reputation every single day. And that's why it's incredibly important as a young lawyer or young professional to always understand that your reputation is vital. What does that mean? That means that whenever you're working on anything, whenever you're interacting with people, you treat them with kindness, decency, and respect. You're always reliable, right? The worst thing in the world a young lawyer can do is volunteer to be part of a group and never show up. What's your reputation then? Oh, that person's kind of shaky. They don't do what they say. And so I say that to you because, again, I think I got hired at the White House counsel's office because I had occasion to demonstrate some traits that the employers there valued. Okay, I've talked a lot. I've talked a bit about running for office. For me, it's not something that is a sort of vocation per se. I came to this late, and I'm here to tell you that you too can come to it late. But I gotta say that the public good needs exceptional people to run for office. And I encourage each of you to consider that. I've got other things I could say, but I'm gonna stop now and welcome your questions and happy to touch on any issues that you'd like to discuss. Thank you very much.
Always need an icebreaker.
Absolutely.
So I'm sure you thought a lot about becoming the Attorney General, of course, the campaign. You got into office, you're there now a few years. What didn't you anticipate that you had learned? What sort of surprised you?
What surprised me more than anything else in the District of Columbia was the fact that there's so much competition in politics, namely that elected officials oftentimes are looking at the next few races down the road. And that if you're not aware of the sort of competitiveness of different elected officials, you might not perceive a meeting, an issue, or even a dispute in the right way. And we were talking in the dean's office about early on in my tenure, my friend is the mayor. And the mayor and I had a major squabble. I think that staff had kind of decided that the mayor and I were eventually going to become rivals, that maybe I would run for the mayor's job. And so therefore, the staffs kind of set themselves up almost like armed forces to fight. Eventually, I would say that the mayor and I were able to make peace and realize that, we're not foes, but we are public servants charged with trying to make things better for DC residents. And I really credit her for, so modestly and diplomatically, burying the hatchet. And as a new elected official, I didn't anticipate that there would be that kind of political infighting, even from people of the same party. So I learned a lot about that. Say the second thing I learned is that lawyers can help a lot, but lawyers can't solve all problems. And so, as Attorney General, newly minted, I was game to try to help anybody and everybody in any which way. But oftentimes, the problems that they were facing were just simply beyond the toolbox of law that we had at our office. So the other lesson was a lesson of humility as to what we could do for people, and to never, ever, ever suggest or lead someone on in thinking that you can actually solve a problem that is outside of your lane. Sir, can you do me a favor and stand up and introduce yourself? There's a microphone here. Okay. Perfect.
My name is Abdul Dasunmu. I'm a 1L here in the law school, and first of all, thank you so much for coming this evening. I am someone who believes in the promise of politics and have considered electoral politics for myself. But I don't think it's a surprise to anyone that all you have to do is turn on the television these days to find something about which to be disillusioned with respect to our politics. The role of money in politics, the acrimony, and also just the degree to which politics sometimes can seem removed from the lived experiences of real people. So my question is, how have you navigated all of those sort of disillusioning factors about our politics to remain hopeful about what you can accomplish as Attorney General in DC?
It's an excellent question, and of course, I felt the same way you have at different points, and including this morning at the gym as I was watching the news. But the reality is that as an elected official, one can certainly focus the toolbox, whatever that toolbox is, on things you can fix, people you can help. And I tell you, if you go around the country, Democrat, Republican, and if you look at what some of the attorney generals are doing in their jurisdictions, what you'll find is that they are absolutely helping the people of their states and territories. And so, in a way, I'm not suggesting that you not run for federal office, but local office and running for position in local office may be exactly where it's at these days. Because there, where the rubber meets the road with real people who have real issues and real problems, you don't have to get mired in, congressional wars back and forth. You can simply focus on a problem, get smart people on your team to analyze it, and then go about bringing solutions to it. I really think that going local and state is exactly where it's at. And I must tell you that in the Attorney General world, while the Democrats have certain perspective on issues, Republicans have different perspectives, even still at the National Association of Attorney General, Democrats and Republicans are able to work together on extraordinarily important questions. DC and my office is leading a multi-state investigation, for example, with the Republican Attorney General of Tennessee. This is just a wonderful human being and a tremendous lawyer. We're focused on the opioid crisis. I don't think we've ever had a conversation about politics. General Slattery is his name, General Slattery and I. And our teams have worked as if they're in the same office. And so throughout the country, sometimes you've got to get outside of Washington. You can actually see great examples of elected officials doing the job that they said they would do, elevating the lives of their constituents. So don't get disheartened. Go to where you can make change, and increasingly that's local and state.
I'm going to project because I don't have an AG. Jennifer Pierre, I'm a 1L at NYU, obviously. So you mentioned your story of immigration, and clearly that's a hot topic right now. Is there a space for the AG in the immigration discourse and immigration reform? And if so, in what ways do you think the AG or other AGs can play a role?
I think there is a role for the AGs. I'm heartened to see my friend Harlan Levy here, who was the chief deputy of the New York AG's office under Eric Schneiderman a few years back. Now he's in the private sector doing quite well. I reference Harlan because Harlan wrote a terrific article about a year or so ago, right, Harlan? Where you I think wisely cautioned attorney generals, and you were kind of speaking to the Democrats, at least that's how I took it, to say, hey, as you're feeling your oats and filing suit against the President of the United States all the time, make sure that you're actually filing suits in areas that you have jurisdiction, have standing, and can have an impact. And so there is a place for attorney generals to wade into the waters on immigration. In fact, you saw that with the travel ban suits. Those were now 4 suits brought by Democratic attorney generals against the administration, really calling out the administration for unconstitutional legislation. And I think what you saw was that the travel ban 1, travel ban 2, travel ban 3, and the 4th iteration, have shifted over time. And the courts, came in to actually create a check and a balance on the President of the United States. I can tell you as a Haitian American, I looked into whether we might have a lawsuit to file on temporary protective status. The President recently indicated that he was not going to renew the TPS status for Haitians, Hondurans, and El Salvadorans. I'm not going to let you in fully to my legal analysis, but let's just say that the legal analysis led me to, take my foot off the gas a bit, because the worst thing we could do is file suit in an important case where, honestly, we might not have the best standing to take it on. But there are important questions like immigration that AGs have a voice in and will continue to voice. Thanks for your question.
Maybe one more before we dine on some delicious food, or another question?
I'll also project. I'm Isabel Terry. I'm a two-out here at the law school, and I would just love to hear a bit more about the Office of Consumer Protection that you've been through. What inspired the formation of that office, and what do you see as the opportunities and obstacles for moving forward?
Great question. So the Office of Consumer Protection is a staple of any successful Office of Attorney General. And what the Office of Consumer Protection and AG offices really seeks to do is to protect consumers from individuals who would separate them from their money via fraud, right, and scams. DC did not have a standalone Office of Consumer Protection, and so that was one of the first tasks that we took on, was to recruit one of the best people in the country from the state of Maryland. I kind of upset my colleague in Maryland when I took his guy. But Phil Zipperman came to the District of Columbia and really started our office. It's a great way to connect with the residents of the District of Columbia, and it was probably the fastest way to communicate to the residents of the District of Columbia that the Office of Attorney General could really do tangible things to help and protect the residents. And I will say that kudos to our office. One of the things we did was we started a mediation group within the Consumer Protection Bureau. About 5 folks, 1 lawyer, the others are investigators and mediators. And what those mediators will do is they literally will get on the telephone with a DC resident who's having an issue with a merchant, and will seek to resolve the issue on the telephone without filing suit with that DC resident. Now, occasionally we have to write letters and maybe issue some threats and that kind of thing. But I'm here to say that last year alone, we returned $7 million to DC residents who called the mediation number. Really extraordinary result. And I give credit to the Consumer Protection Bureau for really forging a bond with DC residents who now feel comfortable calling the Office of Attorney General and sharing sometimes embarrassing tales of how they've been taken advantage of. So it's a tremendous way to connect with residents, and we're thrilled to have one of the strongest consumer protection offices in the country. I gotta say, since we're in New York, the truth is that I model our office after the New York AG's office, the California AG's office, and Massachusetts. And in various ways in the future, you'll see us doing similar things, like the creation of a Civil Rights Bureau. We now have an environmental office with 2 lawyers focused on environmental areas as we start building out our public law firm. Thank you very much for your question.
Thank you, Attorney General.
Thank you. Hey, Bob, can I say something? Here's the last point. I want to really make this point and make it hard. Democratic Attorney Generals Association came out with an initiative called the 1881 Initiative. The 1881 Initiative is all about encouraging women to run for Attorney General, okay? Why is that? Because not unlike the rooms that I was in when I was the managing partner at Venable, when there were absolutely no other people of color in those rooms with other managing partners, the truth is that the AG space needs some diversifying, okay? And so I say to lawyers of color and women in particular, boy, oh boy, the AG job is a great job, and we need extraordinary women lawyers to run for office. If you're interested in that kind of thing, feel free to call me, and I'll encourage you until you hang up the phone. Okay? Thank you.